Hey, I'm Deanna. Thanks for joining me for part 2 of this dresser makeover. I'll give you a quick recap of what I've done here so far, and then we'll dive into the next steps. I started off with cleaning and sanding off the old finish on the dresser. Then I've applied a couple of coats of sealer, and you'll see here on this front this really cool pattern. This is a rub-on decor transfer. It's called Sweet Dreaming, and it's made by Redesign with Prima. Now, if you're looking for a detailed step-by-step instruction on the steps I've taken so far, all you have to do is click the link in the description box below to watch part 1. You may have noticed that the design stops right here and doesn't quite reach the edge of my dresser. And while I think that looks okay, I could just leave it as it is. I'm always up for a creative challenge, so I've been thinking of ways to fill this space. My first idea was just to even take some sandpaper and just lightly distress this edge just to break up that straight line so it wasn't as obvious. Another idea I had was to take stamps or stencils and just lay some pattern over top of the edges and break up that hard line. While both of these are a great idea, I've decided to challenge myself to a bit of hand painting to extend the design. So let's just jump right in. I'll start by creating an outline with a piece of chalk, and I'll try to make both sides of the dresser similar shapes. I'm really just connecting the lines in a way that makes sense to me. I'm going to be using chalk paint for this step because it's great for painting furniture, but you could also use acrylic paint or another type of furniture paint for this. I'll start by scooping a few colors out of my tray and then just playing around mixing the colors until I come up with some shades that are similar to what I see here on the transfer. The colors I'm trying to create are grays, but they're sort of blue, sort of purple, so I'll just play around here, mixing up different combinations on my palette and see what I come up with. This is looking like a really great start. I'm going to do a couple of little test patches right on the transfer and see if any of these colors come close to what is there. I think these colors are looking pretty good. Now they don't have to be exact, but just close, because there's a lot of different colors going on in this part of this transfer. And this shape has a real painterly quality to it, so that's going to be pretty forgiving. It already looks like little brush stroke marks. I'm going to start by blocking in the shape with one of the midtones, and then I'll come back and add little brush marks of different colors to create some variation. Using my small craft brush, I'm just going to mix up some more of that mid-tone color and then I'll get started. And now I'll just layer on top a few other colors, creating a bit of variation and working to blend the hand painted and the transfer parts. I just continued to add little bits of paint here and there until I created a shape that I was happy with. I also put little bits of paint on top of the transfer to help blend the two areas together. There were a couple of leaves down here that would be a little bit trickier to hand paint and make them match. So instead, I just used my nail and kind of broke the edge a little bit to make it more irregular so it didn't end with such a hard straight line. And I think that actually worked pretty well. It's not as obvious that the pattern stops there, and I think that was a really quick, easy solution rather than trying to paint in the leaves and get the colors to match. I'm going to leave this hand painting to sit and dry, and then I'll be applying a layer of this flat out flat sealer, which is the same sealer I used on the wood dresser before I applied the transfer. So in a couple of hours, I'll come back and add a layer of this over top of the transfer and the hand painting to seal and protect everything. I decided to remove this strip of transfer that was applied under the drawer. Once the hand painting was complete, I thought it looked a little out of place. With a medium grit sandpaper, I easily sanded off that section. I applied 2 thin coats to the drawer fronts, and that feels good and protected. I also noticed it helped to even out the sheen between the transfer and the chalk paint, helping the two blend together a little bit better. Let me know in the comments below, what do you think about the hand painting? On this particular transfer, I think it worked pretty well because the parts I was trying to match already had that painterly look to them. It might have been a little bit harder to do if I were trying to match, say, these flowers over here. But again, let me know in the comments below, what do you think of the finished look? I'm almost finished with this dresser makeover. I just have a few more fun touches to add. I'm really excited to try out this glass bead gel. It's made by Redesign with Prima. Now, as a content creator for this company, I get to try out all kinds of fun materials and tools and then give you my tips and feedback. So thanks to Redesign with Prima for sending me these products to use in this video. I'm going to apply this through a stencil onto the dresser, as well as I'll add a little bit to the knobs on the drawers. For this project, I'm only going to use portions of this stencil. So to start off, I'll just block off some areas with painter's tape. If you're not familiar with glass bead gel, it's a gel medium with teeny little glass beads in it. It's white when it's wet, and then it dries clear, leaving this shimmery tone-on-tone effect. I'll show you the results a little later on in the video. This is the portion of the stencil that I'm going to be using, and I'm just going to place it inside each of these inset panels. So to start off, I'll just mark off center of each of these spaces. And now I'll find the center line on the stencil. I like to use some painter's tape to hold the stencil in place, and that frees up my hands for applying the product. Start by scooping some product on the edge of your tool. I'm going to be using this flexible spreader tool. I really like these because of the flex. It just glides nice and smooth over top of the surface, but you could also use a palette knife or putty knife for this step. I like to hold the tool about a 45-degree angle to the stencil, and with gentle pressure, just start spreading the product across the surface. I use my one hand to press the stencil down where it's not quite flat. And I always just drag in one direction. Just avoid going back and forth because sometimes that can cause a little bit of the product to bleed through. Double check that you haven't missed any areas. And then while the product is still wet, gently pull back the stencil. Because this area is still wet here, I want to be careful not to smush my stencil up against it. So I think I'm just going to do every other section for now. I'll do the other side and then come back and fill in the middle spaces. Overall, the process was pretty easy and fun. And once you get going, you sort of get the hang of how thick to spread it and the direction you want to spread it. The most challenging part was right here by this edge where my stencil didn't lay quite flat, and I really had to use my hands to push it in. You could avoid this by doing it just on a flat surface, or next time I'm going to try the stick and style stencils, which are like a sticker that come on a roll, and then that way you don't have to worry about holding the stencil in place at all, and you'll end up with a really nice clean edge. I was able to use the stencil 6 times over without having to rinse in between. As I got closer to the last few applications, it did get a little bit built up on the stencil, so I found it helpful to scrape the excess with the spreader tool in between applications. If I had done many more, I probably would have needed to rinse it, and my fingers were really starting to get sticky as well. So if you're doing a larger project, you might need to wash up a couple of times in between applications. Because of the buildup on the stencil, I had a hard time getting it to lay really flat near the end, and so I did have a bit of product seep underneath. But it's no problem when you pull the stencil off and the product is still wet. I just used the spreader tool and just carved away some of the excess. What I really liked about this glass bead gel is it had really tiny glass beads, which is perfect for the intricate details of the stencil. I've used other brands of glass bead gel with larger beads, and those work great for big open patterns and on wall finishes, but the teeny little beads in this product was perfect for what I was doing here on this dresser. Now I'm going to apply a bit of the glass bead gel right to the top of these wooden knobs, and then once the gel is dry, we'll take a look at the finished piece. I applied 2 coats of sealer to these raw wood knobs, and I allowed them to dry for a few hours after each layer. Now that they are completely dry, I'm using some painter's tape to create a circle stencil for the glass bead gel. Spread the glass bead gel over top of the knob. And while the product is still wet, carefully remove the painter's tape. Since these knobs were brand new, the color is a little bit fresher and cleaner than the color of my dresser. So I'm just going to rub a little bit of this dark wax onto the knobs, and that should antique them just enough so they have similar color to the wood of the dresser. And just for comparison, you can see this one here is the one I just put wax on, and this one here is still the raw wood color. And I think it's just enough antiquing to help it match a little more close to the color of the dresser, and I'm happy with how that looks. The glass bead gel is still a little wet here on these knobs, so I'm going to let them dry a little bit longer, and then I will put them into place. Thanks so much for joining me for this dresser makeover. If you enjoyed the video, click the thumbs up. And if you'd like to be alerted when I upload my next video, remember to click the subscribe button and that little bell icon so you get a notification when I post new content. To wrap up this video, let's take a look at some of those details and the finished piece.